Hello everyone and welcome to another video. I'm going to be doing something different today. I'm going to be doing a Dead by Daylight killer perk tier list. Before we begin, let's set a few rules in place. Firstly, I will try to base this tier list based on the actual power of the perk and not just my opinion. Now different people may have different experiences with different perks, so you may not agree with me entirely. Secondly, this tier list is lettered S through D, S being the best, D being the worst. Thirdly, any perk in this blue tier is the perk that I am discussing. And that should be about it. On to the tier list. For the first perk, we have Agitation. Agitation increases your movement speed while carrying a survivor. This perk can be good for getting basement hooks and possibly beating a body blocking survivor to the hook. While this perk does help in those situations, it's not very versatile, only helping with carrying survivors, which is not a very large aspect of the game. This perk is going in the D tier. Next we have Nurse's Calling. This perk will reveal any survivors performing a healing action within 28 meters of you, for as long as they heal. This perk is great for detection and for stalling the game, and is basically a direct counter to self-care. This perk is definitely going into the S tier. Next we have Bitter Murmur. When a generator is completed, any survivors within 16 meters of the generator are revealed to you. And when the last gen is completed, all survivors' auras will be revealed to you for 10 seconds. This perk is really good for cutting off survivors when they complete a gen, and the 10-second aura reveal can be amazing in some situations. However, even with these upsides, it's pretty underwhelming, and that's why I'm going to be putting it in the B tier. Next is Bloodhound. Bloodhound does one thing, make blood pools more noticeable. Blood pools are brighter and take longer to dissipate. Bloodhound makes it nearly impossible to lose injured survivors, but then again, it only tracks injured survivors, and blood is one of the least used methods of tracking injured survivors. However, I think this perk deserves a C tier. Next up is Brutal Strength. Brutal Strength will increase the speed at which you damage generators and break pallets and walls. This really only shortens chase and patrol times by a small amount and doesn't really matter in the long run. However, I think the perk deserves a C tier. What is that I see? Ah yes, it's Deerstalker. Deerstalker will reveal dying survivors to you within a short radius. This only helps you when you slug survivors, and even then you can just return to the place you downed them and listen for them if they crawl away. This perk is going to stay in the D tier. Next is Distressing. Distressing will blow up your terror radius while giving you extra blood points in the deviousness category. This perk seems like a blood point perk with a downside, but killers like the Doctor might appreciate the larger terror radius, and this perk combos slightly with perks like Unnerving Presence and Colorophobia. However, even then the larger terror radius is more of a detriment than an upside. D tier to you. Next is Enduring. Enduring will reduce the stun when you get hit by a pallet. Enduring was a lot better when it also reduced stuns like perks like Decisive Strike and Head On, but even then it's still a good perk and worthy of an A tier. What's that? Is that Insidious? Insidious will grant you the undetectable status effect while you stand still. As a killer, you have to be running around a lot, and being forced to stand still is just a huge downside for a perk. And most killers have a power that gives you the undetectable status effect while moving around. This perk is really not that great and is going in the D tier. Sorry, Leatherface. Better hold on, we're talking about Iron Grasp. If you're even halfway competent in transporting bodies, the survivors will basically never escape from your grasp with this perk. But it has the same issue as Agitation. Transporting bodies is not that important for the game. D tier to you. Next is Lightborn. Lightborn will make it impossible for you to be blinded by a flashlight or firecrackers, and will reveal the blinder's aura for a lengthy amount of time. This perk will really punish survivors who want to ruin your day, and it's really funny to get this perk to work. However, if no survivors bring flashlights or firecrackers, then this perk is useless. Even then, we'll give it a C tier. Next perk is Monstrous Shrine. This perk will increase the sacrifice progression on basement hooks. This perk isn't that versatile because it only affects basement hooks, and you're only going to get maybe 1 or 2 basement hooks per match, if at all. This perk is D tier. Next we have Hex No One Escapes Death. This perk is terrifying survivors when it activates. When the last gen pops, you gain a speed boost and all survivors are exposed as long as the totem stands. This perk is really good when it activates, but you basically have to lose the game for it to work. So if you're winning, this perk is useless, and I'm pretty sure if I put it in the S tier, you guys would never let me hear the end of it. So I think A tier is reasonable. Next perk is Predator. Predator will make scratch marks more abundant and closer together. Scratch marks are the #1 way to track survivors, and this perk makes them easier to follow. However, If the survivor is running through tall grass, the perk might make them easier to lose than find. This perk is C tier in my opinion. Let's take a good look at Shadowborn. Shadowborn will increase your field of view by a few degrees. This perk helps find survivors that are trying to line of sight juke you, but even then, it might not work. This perk is C tier. Next is Sloppy Butcher. Hitting survivors will inflict them with the Mangled and Hemorrhage status effects. This perk doubles as a detection and stall perk, making survivors bleed more and increasing their healing times. And this perk is used by just playing the game. It's not the best perk of this category, but I think it deserves an A tier. Next is Spies from the Shadows. This perk will create a loud noise notification when a crow is disturbed. Crows are usually the least most used method of tracking survivors, and most survivors don't expect you to use this perk, making a great detection tool. It works well for killers like Huntress that have a really big terror radius, because it will be harder for survivors to run away without being detected. This perk is B tier. Next perk is Strider. Strider will increase the volume of survivors' breathing and grunts of pain, making it impossible to hide for injured survivors. This perk really shines on killers like the Spirit, who likes to use their ears a lot. However, the popular survivor perk Iron Will completely counters this perk, but not all survivors use Iron Will, so I think it's fair that Strider gets an A tier. Next is Thanatophobia. This perk will put an action speed debuff on all survivors for each injured survivor. This perk really shines on killers like Legion and Plague that can quickly injure survivors and keep them injured for a long time. This perk can buy you a lot of time in the matches and deserves its spot in the A tier. The next perk is Tinkerer. This perk will create a loud noise notification on a nearly completed generator, and will grant you undetectable for a short duration. This perk works as a stall and stealth perk. However, if you're across the map when it triggers, you're not going to be able to make it to the generator in time before it's completed. You will still get the undetectable, I guess, but I think this is a C tier perk. Don't get too scared, we're talking about Unnerving Presence. This perk will make skill checks harder for survivors in your terror radius. While it does make skill checks a lot harder, survivors can just rotate to another generator outside your terror radius. This perk will only affect maybe 1 or 2 survivors at a time, and it's not that versatile because it only applies to skill checks. This perk is D tier. Next we have Unrelenting. This perk will reduce your missed attack cooldown, and that's it. If you're not missing attacks, this perk is useless. I can see it being used on killers like the Spirit, but even then, the better you are at the game, the less you need this perk. This perk is D tier. After that, we have Whispers. When any survivor is within 32 meters of you, Whispers will light up. This perk is really good in the early game and speeds up patrol times, since you can just probe a gen and leave if this perk doesn't light up. It also helps when there is only 1 survivor left. This perk is pretty useless in the mid game, however, due to the fact that it's always lit most of the time. Despite this flaw, I think it deserves A tier. Next we have Coup de Grace. Coup de Grace. Coup de Grace? Coup de Grace? Coup de Goose? Coup de Grace? When a gen gets completed, this perk will gain a token. The next time you lunge, a token is consumed and your lunge range is increased by 60%. While you may say this perk only works if you're losing, you have to remember that even if you win, at least 2 or 3 generators are going to be completed, so even then you will get at least some use out of this perk. The only downside of this perk being is that it will consume a token if you lunge at all, so it's really easy to waste precious tokens. The lunge range is pretty ridiculous though, so I'll put it in the B tier. Next perk is Hoarder. This perk will cause a notification when any survivor interacts with a chest or item. It will also spawn 2 extra chests on the map, while making the items found in the chest less rare. This perk combos really well with Franklin's Demise, forcing survivors to drop their items and punishing them for picking back up. However, without that perk, not many survivors check chests at high ranks. Most high rank survivors just have the item they need from the get-go, and don't need to search chests. I think this perk is B tier though, due to its really good detection ability. Next is Oppression. After damaging a generator, 3 other generators at random start to regress, and if a survivor is working on a targeted gen, they receive a difficult skill check. The ability to slow down 4 generators with 1 kick is very powerful. The only problem being is that there's a very low chance that 4 different generators are going to have enough progress to make this perk worth it. Even then, I'll give it a B tier due to the possible generator regression it can cause. Are you hungry? Because next up is Barbecue and Chili. This perk will reveal survivors 40 meters or more away from you after hooking a survivor. This effect is good to know where you have to go after getting a hook, and it has an additional effect to give you double blood points in all categories if you hook every survivor at least once. This perk is amazing for farming blood points or just for detection, and for these reasons is going in the S tier. Next we have Franklin's Demise. After hitting a survivor with a basic attack, they will drop the item they are holding and have to pick it up. This perk is good for stall because their survivors have to waste time getting their precious items back. And they must do it quickly because if they take too long, the entity will consume the item and they can't get it back. The downside of this perk is obvious. If no survivors have items, this perk is useless. Yet again, this is the perk you bring right before the match starts, so the downside is really minor, and for these reasons is why I'm putting it in the A tier. Next is Knockout. This perk will make so dying survivors' auras are not shown to other survivors if they are more than 16 meters away. This will also inflict dying survivors with a blindness status effect and make them crawl slower. This perk is okay for slugging builds, but even then it doesn't have much use out of that situation. It's D tier. After that, we have Dying Light. This perk gives you a token for each time you hook a non-obsession survivor up to a maximum of 5, and will give all survivors except the obsession a 3% action speed decrease for each token. This perk is good for stalling the game, but it takes time to set up. But a 15% reduction to all action speeds is nothing to scoff at, giving this perk a B tier. Let's go on to Play with Your Food. This perk gives you a token for each time your obsession escapes in a chase, up to 3, and grants you a 5% movement speed increase for each token. But you lose a token each time you do any offensive action, like attacking. This perk can give you tons of movement speed, but it's hard to keep that speed going to make it worth it. This perk is C tier. Next up is Hex Devour Hope. This perk gives you a token when the survivor gets unhooked when you are 24 meters or farther away. When you're at 5 tokens, you get a speed boost after hooking someone, all survivors become exposed, and you can kill all survivors by your hand. This perk is terrifying for survivors if you can get all 5 stacks, but doing this may be difficult. Your totem might get cleansed right before or you can even get 1 stack. Even then, Devour Hope gets a B tier in my opinion. Next we have Hex Ruin. You probably know where this perk is going. Any gen not being worked on by a survivor instantly regresses 200% faster than usual. This perk is by far the best stall perk in the game. If you can scare survivors off of gens really well, this perk will bring you generator progress to a screeching halt. Even if the survivors search for your totem, they waste precious time doing so. Ruin undoubtedly goes into the S tier. For the next perk, we have Hex Thrill of the Hunt. This perk can slow down cleansing speed on Hex Totems and also give you a notification when a survivor starts working on a Hex Totem. This perk is good for defending your Hexes, and it also gives a slight increase in blood points in the hunting category, which is just icing on the cake. This perk is A tier. Overcharge is our next perk. After kicking a gen, the next survivor to work on it gets a very difficult skill check, that when they fail it, the gen loses more progress. This perk doubles as a stall and a detection perk, but if the survivor succeeds the skill check, this perk won't get much use. However, it has no cooldown, and most survivors don't expect the skill check, and even if they do, they probably won't succeed. I'll give this perk an A tier. Next is Monitor and Abuse. This perk will shrink your terror radius while out of a chase, and increases it while in a chase. This perk will allow you to get 25% closer to survivors before they are aware of your presence, which is not half bad. This perk also gives a minor Shadowborn effect by increasing your field of view slightly. This perk is simple, but very powerful, which is why I think it should go in the S tier. Next is Overwhelming Presence. Item consumption rates are increased by 100% for survivors in your terror radius. Even though you're cutting survivors' item use in half, this perk isn't very versatile. Just like Unnerving Presence, this perk is only going to affect 1 or 2 survivors at a time, and it has the issue that if no survivors have items, this perk is useless. And even if the survivors have items, this perk doesn't restrict them from using it, it just makes them get less use out of it. Overwhelming Presence gets a D tier. Beast of Prey is our next perk. This perk will suppress your red stain after getting Bloodlust 1 during a chase. While the red stain is the best mechanic for survivors to predict the killer's movement, I'm going to tell you why this perk is not that good. Firstly, it only suppresses your red stain Bloodlust 1. Once you get to Bloodlust 2, this perk deactivates. Secondly, to make this perk useful, you have to chase a survivor for at least 15 seconds. 15 seconds is quite long for the average chase, and taking that long every chase is not that good. And thirdly, if you're downing survivors without Bloodlust, why would you ever need this perk? This perk generally confuses me, and that's why it's getting a D tier. Next perk coming up is Hex Huntress Lullaby. This perk is very annoying once you get to 5 stacks, causing that there will be no skill check warning before skill checks. This causes survivors to be so hyper-focused on getting a skill check that they might not check for your approach. However, this perk does have the same problem as Devour Hope. It might get cleansed before you get use out of it. However, Huntress Lullaby deserves a B tier. Next is Territorial Imperative. This perk will reveal survivor auras for 3 seconds when they enter the basement. I'm going to explain why this perk is garbage now. A 3-second aura reveal is absolutely laughable. You could miss it entirely. Also, it has the weird limitation where you have to be more than 32 meters away. And it has a 20-second cooldown. Why? This perk isn't good for a Leatherface basement camp build. And if even Leatherface doesn't want you, then you know you're garbage. Be gone to the D tier! Next, we have Blood Warden. After the exit gates open, this perk will reveal survivor auras when they're in an exit gate. This perk will also block all exit gates for a lengthy amount of time when a survivor gets hooked when at least one gate is open. There's a lot of timing involved for this perk to work, but it is very powerful when it works. This perk does give you the downside of having to deal with 3 perks the whole game until the exit's open, and you have to be losing for it to activate. However, this perk has such a powerful effect that I think it deserves a B tier. The next perk we have is Fire Up. This perk grants you a 4% action speed boost for every generator that has been completed. The main strategy of this perk is to freeze the game when there's 1 generator left to gain a 16% boost. This perk works really well in the mid game and amazingly in the end game. And just like I said, at least 1 or 2 generators are going to be completed, so more times than not you will get at least some use out of this perk. For that reason is why I'm putting it in the B tier. For our next perk, we have Remember Me. This perk will increase the exit gate opening time by 16 seconds if you can land 4 hits on your obsession. This perk really shines on killers that can't patrol exit gates that well, like Leatherface, Trapper, and Deathslinger. Landing 4 hits on your obsession is pretty difficult, and the obsession is not affected by this perk. Remember Me is also another endgame perk like Blood Warden and Noed. This perk is B tier. Next is Hangman's Trick. This perk will give you a notification when a survivor starts sabotaging a hook, and will also reveal survivor auras within 6 meters of a hook while carrying a survivor. This perk is a direct counter to sabotage builds, but not everyone uses sabotage, and even then this might not completely counter the saboteur, but will just make them less consistent. This perk is D tier just because you don't know who's going to sabotage and who isn't. Next is Make Your Choice. This perk will expose someone when they rescue someone from a hook, if they unhook them 32 meters away from you. This perk is really good for getting easy downs due to how long they are exposed. This perk doesn't really have many downsides except its 60-second cooldown, which is why it's in the A tier. Next is Surveillance. This perk will reveal all regressing generator auras in white, and will change to yellow for 16 seconds after it stops regressing. This perk comboed with Hex Room will basically turn you into the all-seeing eye, knowing what gens are being worked on and which one you should leave alone. This perk also increases generator repair noises by 8 meters, which shortens patrol times. This perk has really good benefits that can help without much work, which is why it's in the A tier. Next, we have Bamboozle. This perk will block windows that you vault, and increases your vaulting speed. Being able to block a window command is very powerful, especially blocking powerful windows like the Killer Jack window or the window in the Asylum. Due to its versatility and ability to shut down chases quickly, I'm putting Bamboozle in the S tier. Next is Colorophobia. This perk will decrease the healing speed of survivors in your terror radius by 50%. Now, a 50% decrease to your healing speed is nothing to scoff at. It increases a 15-second heal into about a 22-second heal. However, it has the same issue as Unnerving Presence and Overwhelming Presence. Unless you're running the Distressing perk, you're only going to be affecting 1 or 2 survivors. And those 2 survivors might not be healing. I do consider Colorophobia to be better than those 2 perks, so I'll put it in the C tier. The next perk is Pop Goes the Weasel. Kicking a gen within 40 seconds of hooking a survivor will automatically shave 25% progress off that generator. That's 20 seconds of generator time gone in one fell swoop. This perk was a lot easier to use when the timer was 60 seconds, but even after its nerf, it's a very viable stall perk option. This perk deserves an S tier. Next is Rancor. This perk will reveal all survivor auras to you when a generator is completed, while also allowing your obsession to see you for a short duration. This perk will also expose the obsession and allow you to kill them by your hand. This perk's whole point is that it's a really good detection effect with a downside. Your obsession will basically know where you are the whole game, but if they go too far, they might regret it. This perk is about B tier in my opinion. The next perk is Hex Haunted Grounds. This perk will expose every survivor in the map when they cleanse it. Many killers like the Nurse could down a whole survivor team with just this one perk. And this perk spawns 2 Hex Totems, raising the chance of its activation. And while you can't choose when it activates, survivors will take the chance of cleansing a Hex more times than not. I'll give this perk an A tier due to how fast you can wipe out a whole team with it. Spirit Fury is our next perk. After breaking 2 pallets, this perk activates. When activated, the next time you are stunned with a pallet, this perk will instantly break it. This perk will shorten chase times by a minor amount, and comboed with the Enduring perk will basically negate the pallet drop. This perk isn't super versatile though, and without Enduring it will only shorten chase times by a minor amount. I'll give this perk a B tier. Discordance is next. This perk will reveal a generator's aura in yellow when 2 or more survivors are working on it. This perk is really good in the early game just in case you might get gen rushed early. This perk is also good when you're in a chase because you have the ability to disrupt multiple survivors instead of just one. This perk deserves an S tier. Next is Iron Maiden. This perk halves the time it takes to check lockers, and will reveal and expose survivors if they exit a locker. While it does cut a locker checking times in half, it's still a very minor part of the game that will still waste your time even with this perk. That and the survivors are only exposed for 30 seconds. You could be across this map and this perk wouldn't matter. I can see this being used on the Huntress because it actually does speed up her hatchet reload speed. That's really only the killer I would recommend this perk to, which is why I'm putting it in the D tier. Next is Mad Grit. This perk reduces missed attack cooldowns to 0 while carrying a survivor, and will pause the wiggle timer on survivors when hitting another survivor. This perk is a direct counter to survivors' body blocking hooks, but this isn't the most common practice in the game. This perk isn't very versatile, and only works when survivors say it works. I'll put Mad Grit in the D tier. Corrupt Intervention is next. This perk will block the 3 generators farthest from you at the start of the game for 2 minutes. This perk is really good for trap setting killers like Trapper or Hag because it forces survivors to walk into your trap territory. This perk is also generally good for killers because survivors have to come closer to you, which results in early hooks. This perk does have the downside of when the 2 minutes are up, this perk deactivates for good. This perk is good enough for me to put it in the B tier. Dark Devotion is our next perk. This perk will transfer your terror radius to your obsession if you land a hit on them. This perk can make you really stealthy, and your obsession can scare survivors off generators even though you're not there. However, it is luck based whether you find your obsession or not, and even then, this perk is B tier. Try not to scream, Infectious Fright is next. When downing a survivor, all survivors in your terror radius will scream. This perk is good for a slugging build, but it only forces survivors to scream, not reveal their auras. That's what this perk used to do before they changed it. This perk is an okay detection option, and I think it gets a C tier. Next is Furtive Chase. After hooking your obsession, gain a token up to a maximum of 4. Each token will decrease your terror radius by 4 meters. This perk would be godlike if it weren't for one tiny thing. It only reduces your terror radius while in a chase. Why in the actual hecking heck do I care about my terror radius in the chase? The survivor I'm chasing can hear my chase music, and survivors not being chased can just know I'm chasing someone and won't care. Why would I use this perk? And that's not the worst part. When your obsession dies, this perk deactivates. Why? For what reason? This perk is so bad that... give me a second. There we go. Anyways, next is I'm All Ears. This perk will reveal survivor auras when they perform a rushed action within 48 meters of you. Since survivors won't do rushed actions unless they're in a chase, don't expect this to be that good of a detection perk. Where this perk does shine is during a chase with tall walls. When a survivor fast vaults, you can see them through the wall, and it lessens the chance of you being juked. This effect is pretty good, I'll admit, but not all loops have tall walls, making this perk generally useless. Unless the survivor suddenly fast vaults while not in a chase, this perk is C tier for now. Next, we have Thrilling Tremors. After picking up a survivor, generators not being worked on are blocked for 16 seconds. And these generators are revealed in white for the duration. This perk is most used for detection, being able to know which gens are being worked on at the moment. It may also act as a slight stall perk, just in case a survivor has to rotate generators, being a strong detection effect for the low cost of picking up a survivor. This perk is going to get a B tier. Next is Cruel Limits. This perk will block windows near a completed generator for a short duration. This perk can be really strong if luck is on your side. This perk does have problems, however. If there are not a lot of windows near the gen, then this perk is useless. If you can't get to the completed generator in time, this perk is useless. And even then, it only affects windows. If it also affected pallets, like how Blood Favor works, it might be better. Personally, I would rather take Bamboozle because it's more reliable. I'll give this perk a C tier. Next is Mindbreaker. This perk will inflict survivors with the exhausted status effect when they work on a gen, for as long as they work on the gen. This effect also lingers for a few seconds after leaving. This perk doesn't really do much if a survivor doesn't have an exhaustion perk. Even then, it doesn't help for all of them. It will also really only counter perks like Sprint Burst and Dead Hard and maybe Live, and even then, the exhaustion doesn't stay for long enough to make it worth it. This perk is D tier. For the last of the Demogorgon's perks, we have Surge. Surge will start regressing generators within 32 meters of downing survivors. This perk is a pretty solid stall perk, being able to regress gens without wasting time kicking. This perk will also regress gens even when survivors are working on them. However, you have to down the survivor with a basic attack, so no Hillbilly Chainsaw, Nurse Lethal Blink, or Pig Ambushed. However, this perk's upsides give it an A tier. Let's take a look at Blood Echo. After hooking a survivor, all injured survivors will suffer from the exhausted and hemorrhage status effects. This perk really shines at killers like Plague and Legion who like to keep survivors injured, and being able to get rid of the most powerful perks in the game is really good. I think this perk is B tier. Nemesis is next. When a survivor blinds you or stuns you, they will become your obsession. And anyone who becomes your obsession will become oblivious and their aura will be revealed to you. This perk is made to punish survivors who really want to ruin your day. Every killer hates to be stunned or blinded, and this perk will exact your revenge on your pitiful prey. The oblivious status effect might not help you in most situations because you'll be in a chase with them and therefore they will not hear your chase music. But the aura reveal is nice. This perk deserves a B tier. Next is Zanshin Tactics. This perk will reveal the auras of pallets, breakable walls, and windows within a short range. Knowing where survivors are going to run when you chase them is a good effect. I also see it being used on Trapper. Being able to know where the pallets and windows are will shorten your bear trap setting time. This perk doesn't do much else though, and it goes on cooldown after you damage a survivor. I think C tier is fair. Next is Dead Man Switch. After hooking your obsession, this perk will activate for 45 seconds. During the activation, if any survivor stops working on a generator, this perk will block it for as long as the perk is active. This perk has some problems. Firstly, if a survivor doesn't get off the generator, then this perk does nothing. And secondly, for example, if the survivor works on a gen for 40 seconds, then stops, the gen will be blocked for 5 seconds. It also has the luck factor in the form of if you find your obsession or not. This perk really isn't that great and gets its spot in the D tier. Gearhead is next. After landing 2 basic attacks, Gearhead activates. When a survivor gets a good skill check when this perk is activated, the generator will be revealed to you for as long as they repair it. This perk is a really good form of detection perk, the reason being is that the survivor doesn't know that you know where they are. And sure, if the survivor gets a great skill check, it won't reveal the generator, but even the most experienced survivors won't get great skill checks every single time. This perk is just generally good detection, that's why I'll put it in the B tier. Next perk is Hex Retribution. This perk will cause survivors to be oblivious when they cleanse a dull totem, and will reveal all survivors' auras when a Hex Totem is cleansed. This perk is generally luck-based, because you can't control when it activates, but it is very powerful when it activates, especially if you combo with other Hex perks that they want to cleanse. This perk is a solid A tier. Deathbound is next. When a survivor gets healed within 32 meters of you, the healer will scream and will become oblivious if they stray too far from each other. This perk is an okay for detection perk and a pseudo-stealth perk. This perk is a B tier. The next perk is Forced Penance. When a survivor takes a protection hit, they will become broken for 80 seconds. This perk doesn't really seem that good. If you chase the broken survivor, then they can't heal because you're chasing them, so the broken doesn't matter. And if you chase the non-broken one, by the time you get to the broken one, they will probably not be broken anymore. I know this perk is better since it's buffed, but it still isn't that viable. This perk just presents you with a lose-lose situation, and is why I'm putting it in the D tier. Next is Trail of Torment. After kicking a gen, this perk will grant you undetectable until that gen stops regressing, or any survivor takes damage. This perk was next to garbage before its rework, but now that it has been reworked, it's really good. The ability to be undetectable for basically an indefinite amount of time is really good. It does have the downside of revealing the generator's aura while it's active, but this is pretty minor. This perk is A tier due to its next level stealth effect. Dragon's Grip is next. If a survivor works on a generator 30 seconds after you kick it, the survivor's aura will be revealed and it will become exposed for 60 seconds. This perk is good for when a survivor hides before you patrol their generator, and works on it when you leave. Plus, the exposed lasts long enough that even if you chase them long enough to get Bloodlust 3, they will still be exposed when you hit them. This perk has tons of uses, and that's why I'm putting it in the S tier. Don't worry, we're almost there. Next is Hex Blood Favor. This perk will block nearby pallets from being pulled down after hitting a survivor for 15 seconds. This perk is really good during a chase, since pallets are the main method of extending chase times. Due to how fast this perk can shut down chase times, I'll put it in the S tier. Next is Hex Undying. This perk will grant all Hex Totems insurance, transferring them to a random Dull Totem after they are cleansed. This perk also reveals survivors' auras when they get close to any totem. This perk is really good, almost overpowered, but this perk got a nerf which will deactivate once it transfers a totem, losing both its insurance and the aura reveal ability. If this wasn't the case, it would be the easiest S tier of this list, but due to its immense nerf, I'm going to have to put it in the A tier. Finally, I've saved the best for last. Save the best for last. That's the name of the perk. Haha, perk humor. Anyways, this perk grants you a token for every hit you land on non-obsession survivor, and takes away 2 for every hit on your obsession. This perk will decrease your successful attack cooldown by 5% for each token up to 40%. Now, a 40% attack cooldown is ridiculous, and this perk will make chases a breeze. It also allows you to perform other actions quicker, like cloaking with the Wraith or teleporting with the Hag. Due to this perk's ability to shorten chase times, I'll put it in the S tier. And that's the completed tier list, everyone. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you made it this far, then you clearly like my content and should consider subscribing. This is my first time making a majorly edited video and my first time writing a script, so please excuse my noob script writing skills. Also a big thanks to Sihin and Rixer1 for helping me get the footage for this video. This video would be nearly not as interesting or informative without them. And you're probably asking, will I do a Survivor Perk tier list? Eventually. Maybe. I don't know. After this video, I'm going to return to my usual uploads. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed. Bye bye!